Hope colleague. What? Hope colleague? Did you mean Hope College?
Was ist ein Atheist?
Was ist ein Atheist? Do you have a speech impediment or something? Why do you have subtitles?
Was will er?
Was will er? Er wants you to talk normal.
Was wirft er den Christen vor? Und wie hat der Atheismus das Christentum beeinflusst?
Hold on, wait a minute. I think I get it. You're one of them foreigners with one of them goofy-ass foreigner languages. I guess that explains why you have subtitles.
Ein vielleicht provozierendes Thema. Und nicht ganz einfach.
Yeah, you're right. It's not an easy topic. If we're gonna have a discussion, I don't want to have to read you the whole time. That's not easy. So yeah, I'm not doing it. See you later.
Aber bekanntlich sind Schwierigkeiten oft interessante Herausforderungen.
Oh boy, it's a challenge now. Well, I've never said no to a challenge, to the best of my recollection. So alright, I guess I'll read you and we can have a discussion, but I sure as hell ain't speaking no funny language, Siegfried. Guten Tag, let's get going.
In seiner Dichtung 7 Käs lässt Jean Paul in einer Traumvision den toten Christus eine Rede halten. Diese Rede zeigt recht anschaulich, was Atheismus ist.
You want to recite a poem? No, you know what? I'm not going to let you stand there and waste everybody's time with a big emotional poetry recital. Tell you what, I'll give you 20 seconds, and if anyone wants to read your poem, they can pause the video and read your poem. How's that?
Ich ging durch die Welten, ich stieg in die Sonne und flog mit den Milchstraßen in die Wüsten des Himmels. Aber es ist kein Gott. Ich stieg herab, soweit das Sein seine Schatten wirft, und schaute in den Abgrund und rief, Vater, wo bist du? Aber ich hörte nur den ewigen Sturm, den niemand regiert. Und der schimmernde Regenbogen aus Westen stand ohne eine Sonne, die ihn schuf, über dem Abgrund und tropfte hinunter. Und als ich aufblickte zur unermesslichen Welt nach dem göttlichen Auge, starrte sie mich mit einer leeren, bodenlosen Augenhöhle an. Die Ewigkeit lag auf dem Chaos und zernagte es und wiederkäute sich. Starres, dummes Nichts. Kalte ewige Notwendigkeit. Wahnsinniger Zufall. Kennt ihr das unter euch? Wann zerschlagt ihr das Gebäude? Und mich?
Beautiful.
Eine klare Botschaft. Viele Menschen sagen, es gibt keinen Gott. Nur ewige Notwendigkeit und der Zufall bestimmen das Chaos des Weltalls, das schließlich in das Nichts treibt. Deshalb sei es an der Zeit, den Glauben an Jesus Christus in Stücke zu zerschlagen.
So what you seem to be saying is that the rejection of Christian belief leads to a belief in nothing but empty chaos in the universe and the universe's eventual demise. Furthermore, you believe that the belief in that kind of a universe leads to people wanting to fight against Christian belief. Now, I'm going to disagree with that a little bit. It's certainly not true in all cases. But let's pretend it is. You seem to think that this is unfair. Let me turn it back around on you to see how it looks from the other side. Many people say there is a God, only eternal subjugation, and its will determines the chaos of the universe, which eventually... Well, I don't really know what happens to the universe, but in the Christian doctrine, the world burns away into nothing. Therefore, it is time to smash the non-belief in Jesus Christ into pieces. Now, whether you think that's right or wrong from either side isn't really the point here. The point is, if we have to put up with it from some Christians, then it seems perfectly fair that Christians have to put up with it from some of us.
Die Welt ist heute aus dem Fugen geraten. Zahlreiche Werte und moralische Maßstäbe werden für ungültig erklärt oder relativiert.
I don't know what values and moral standards you're talking about. I guess you're talking about like gay butt sex, because you think it's icky or whatever. And your book says that that's wrong, and wearing mixed fabrics is wrong. And speaking of fabrics, cool undershirt, by the way. You kind of remind me of the strongman from Family Guy. It's a real powerful look. But I mean, things overall seem to be pretty good, and I don't hear a lot of people arguing against murder laws or burglary laws or anything like that, so I really don't understand what moral standards you're talking about other than kind of pointless things, really.
Was einmal hoch und heilig war, wird straflos dem ätzenden Gift der Kritik und der Skepsis ausgesetzt.
Yeah, it's just awful when people question people in power, isn't it? I mean, for proof you need look no further than Germany. Oh. Sorry. But okay, never mind. That's the exception. Of course it's better to always listen to the people who have the power, the people who claim to be divinely commanded to tell you what to do. You know, the people with the power to tell other people to crush other people's lives like they were bugs. The people who've invented for themselves the power to control other people's minds and make them think that if they don't do as they're told, they're gonna burn for eternity. The people who say, don't investigate, don't question how the universe works, we'll tell you, because we know, God told us. The Earth is the center of the fucking universe, and the sun goes around it. That's it, you little peons. Shut up and do your work. Man, every time I think about those criticism and skepticism things, I just get so darn mad.
Alte Autoritäten werden gestürzt oder als museumsreif belächelt.
And yes, of course, authorities are always worth having if they're ancient. How long they've ruled is of course the best indicator of who should rule.
In einer solchen Situation ist es verständlich, dass auch christlicher Glaube in die Mühle des Zweifels gerät.
Are you serious? Ancient authorities being overthrown is a situation in which it's understandable that Christian faith goes into the grinder of doubt? For thousands of years, Christians have followed an ancient authority that probably never even existed. Why should this be a problem?
In einer Welt, in der alles gesetzmäßig zugeht oder in der nach anderer Sichtweise nur Zufall und Chaos herrschen, in einer solchen Welt haben Gott und Glaube keinen Platz. Deshalb rief schon Nietzsche aus, wohin ist Gott? Ich will es euch sagen, wir haben ihn getötet. Ihr und ich, wir alle sind seine Mörder.
Well, no. It was just me. But hey, it's okay, he's back.
Kein Wunder, dass in einer solchen Gesellschaft gläubige Christen als wunderliche Einzelgänger betrachtet werden, die dem Raritätenkabinett der Geschichte entsprungen sind. Sie sind nicht mehr gefragt und werden nur noch mitleidsvoll belächelt.
If you're so butthurt about people not coming to Christians with their big life questions anymore, and you're so butthurt about people pitifully sneering at you when you start babbling about this stuff in public, maybe what you should do is stop crying about how fewer people believe your arbitrarily chosen pet fairy tale than they used to, and actually start having something useful to say. If you really want people to respect you and feel like they can talk to you and want to come to you first when they have a problem, then learn how to use your brain before you speak. They're not going to come to you just because you're a Christian. They're going to come to you because you're worth talking to. They don't want a sermon, they want a conversation. If someone's struggling with something they feel guilty about, or they're having trouble coping with the death of a loved one, and they don't believe in your theology, it's not going to do anybody any good to give them a lecture about divine punishments and hells and heavens and believing in Jesus and how God works in mysterious ways. It's just not going to help. So if what you actually want is really just for people to come to you for advice and for you to be able to give good advice, that's my advice to you. But if this isn't about you actually just wanting to be the person that people come to for advice because it makes you feel good inside, and it's actually just about you being all teary-eyed that other people haven't been suckered into the same silly goofballery that you have, then maybe what you should do is just set aside this silly, outdated notion that people are going to want to come to Christians for advice just because they're Christians. Put it into the curiosity cabinet of history, as it were.
Obwohl inzwischen viele Menschen sich wieder einer Religion zuwenden, nach einem Glauben suchen, nach etwas, das in einer sinnlos gewordenen Welt wieder Halt gibt.
Wait, I thought you said that only atheists believe the world is meaningless. But if people are turning towards religion, then they don't believe the world is meaningless because they're religious, and only atheists believe the world is meaningless. And then they wouldn't need the strength that you're saying that they're turning to religion for. What they would actually have done is turn to religion to put meaning into their world. So seemingly it has nothing to do with giving them strength to cope in a meaningless world, but rather to give meaning to a meaningless world. And so I don't get how the strength part even factors in. I'm really confused.
Ist der Atheismus immer noch die Grundlage zahlreicher Lebenshaltungen.
You know, I really don't think atheism is the basis of very many lives. Maybe to some extent people like me who think about these things a lot, put the views out there on the internet, or people who involve themselves in things like atheist conferences. To some extent it's become part of how they think about themselves. But that's a pretty small minority. And from what you say after this, I get the impression that those are not the people that you mean. What you mean is atheism is the basis of the lives of atheists in general, which I would very much disagree with, considering that you don't have to do anything, or believe anything, or be a certain kind of person, or join a club to be an atheist. Of course, this could just be a misunderstanding in the translation, or a minor problem with the way that you phrased it. But if that's the case, what I've just said doesn't have to apply to you, Siegfried. It can apply to whoever else has that opinion.
In der Nähe der atheistischen Religion befindet sich der kritische Atheismus.
Yeah, criticizing a religion does not make you religious.
Fühlt sich berufen, einen Glauben mit Argumenten und Beweisen bekämpfen zu müssen, weil nicht mehr der Realität unserer Welt entspricht.
See, the key point there is that the criticism of religion is based around criticizing religion. Like you say, fighting a belief. Saying that fighting against religion makes you religious is like saying that fighting a bear turns you into a bear. It makes no sense.
Religion ist für ihn erstens falscher Optimismus. Denn schließlich würde ja durch das Eingreifen Gottes alles gut ausgehen.
Did you just imitate the critical atheist imitating the Christians? I thought you were kind of one note, but that was fucking deep. Anyway, I think it's debatable how well things would work out in the end for anybody, including the Christians, unless they're the kind of people who dream about sitting in heaven and pointing and laughing at all their family and friends who are in hell. But maybe most people get off on that, I don't know.
Zweitens ist Religion für ihn Ablehnung der Verantwortung für das eigene Leben und das Schicksal dieser Welt, weil ja angeblich Gott alles in den Händen halte.
In some sense, yeah, it's an abdication of responsibility, but I'm not convinced that it's an abdication of responsibility because the world is all in the hands of God. As a matter of fact, it seems like a lot of the time when I hear Christians talking about someone supernatural interacting with the world, it's Satan and not God. What's God doing? Sitting up on his cloud playing Xbox? The devil's down here every single day, spreading Islam and atheism, legalizing abortions and marijuana and gay marriage. Really doesn't seem like God takes much of a hand in the fate of the world at all, does it? Unless by fate of the world you mean the final fate of the world, i.e. the apocalypse. But if that's what you mean, I really don't see how the end of the world has much to do with taking responsibility for your life now, so I don't think that's what you mean.
Und drittens ist Religion Weltflucht, weil die Gläubigen nach dem Tod oder nach der Wiederkunft Jesu ja ein besseres Leben erwarten. Weil es Gott aber nicht gibt, sei dies nur eine Illusion, die eine Verbesserung unserer Welt und des eigenen Lebens verhindere.
Certainly it's about avoiding the reality of death. But in terms of avoiding improving our world, it certainly is that sometimes too. Global warming? Doesn't matter, we'll have been raptured by then. Doesn't matter, it's been 2,000 years and nothing's happened. Space colonization? If God wanted us on Mars, he'd have put us there.
Eine letzte Form soll der praktische Atheismus sein. Er macht die Kirchen in der westlichen Gesellschaft am meisten nervös. Die Mehrheit dieser praktischen Atheisten akzeptieren zwar Gott, kann aber mit ihm in ihrem Leben nichts anfangen.
If the majority of these so-called practical atheists accept God, then the majority of these so-called practical atheists are not atheists. I don't know where you got the idea that you can have an atheist who accepts the existence of a God, but saying that is like saying you have an empty cup full of water. Now I understand what you're trying to express here. You're trying to say that for all practical purposes they live as if they were atheists. But your video is about atheism, not about people who live as though they were atheists, and here you've listed practical atheism as one of your forms of atheism.
Für diese Atheisten, sie scheinen die Mehrheit zu sein, ist es belanglos geworden, ob Gott existiert oder nicht.
So apparently, atheists who accept God are the majority of atheists. I think my commentary is unnecessary because it's quite clear how stupid that is.
Nicht nur die Enttäuschung gegenüber dem Versagen des Christentums oder die platte Gleichgültigkeit, sondern auch ein kurzes, einfaches Glaubensbekenntnis. Tatsächlich, es ist ein Glaubensbekenntnis. Denn ein Atheist kann nicht beweisen, was er da glaubt.
But with that whole practical atheist thing, you just said the majority of atheists believe in God. So I guess that means that the real reason you have trouble understanding atheists is that atheists believe in God, and you don't believe that God can be proven. And that's just too much for you. That's hilarious.
Erstens, niemand hat die Welt geschaffen.
I guess that wasn't actually what you meant. I thought you'd become an atheist there for a minute. I thought you'd become someone who doesn't believe in God for a minute. The majority of atheists accept God now, so that term doesn't really work anymore. But thinking about this point, what you actually say atheists believe is that no one created the world. But that's not necessarily true. There are atheistic intelligent design explanations. Why could that someone not be an alien superintelligence that started a chain reaction that set off another universe and created our world? Why could that someone not be a computer programmer of a massive simulation? I know the question still remains of where did that alien or that programmer come from, but the question also remains if you say it's a god. You still have to answer where it came from. But in terms of just how our world came into existence, sure, you can absolutely believe that someone created the world and not have it be a god.
Zweitens, kein Gott ist für mich gestorben.
I'm pretty sure Christians don't believe a god died for them either. If you're omnipresent inside and outside the universe, I don't think having some tiny little aspect of yourself die for 3 days on Earth counts. Although, those Romans weren't stupid. Maybe they did figure out how to pin literally everything inside and outside of the universe to that cross. I don't know how you'd nail the cross to itself for it to die too, but I'm sure it's doable.
Drittens, es gibt kein Leben nach dem Tod.
Wrong. As a matter of fact, in one of those sections that I skipped over, you talked about atheistic religions such as Buddhism. You included Buddhists within your list of types of atheists, and Buddhism includes reincarnation, which is life after death. So you are wrong, wrong, wrong. And it's not as if only Buddhists and theists believe in afterlives or reincarnation either. There are atheists who believe in afterlives. There are atheists who believe in reincarnation. A god is not required to enable those things. They're totally separate concepts.
In der Vergangenheit hatte man für alle unerklärlichen Ereignisse und schweren Schicksalsschläge Gott als Lückenbüßer herangezogen. Seitdem der Mensch nun viele Fragen, die früher nur geglaubt wurden, wissenschaftlich beantworten kann, ist der Lückenbüßer-Gott überflüssig geworden. So glaubt es der Atheist.
Those silly atheists. Of course the god of the gaps hasn't become obsolete. Look, I can see all kinds of gaps still. Clearly God belongs in every single one of those gaps. Granted, they're a lot fewer and smaller than they used to be, but don't let that fool you. The fact that most of the gaps that God filled in the past have been now filled by science doesn't mean that all the gaps we see now shouldn't be filled by God. All science did is prove which gaps we were wrong about, and that proves that we were right about all the other ones.
So habe der Mensch gelernt, in allen wichtigen Fragen des Lebens mit sich selbst fertig zu werden, ohne die Hilfe eines Gottes. Das meint er jedenfalls.
Yeah, I'm sure, Siegfried, that you know better how people cope than they do.
In persönlichen Krisen kann er jedoch mit sich und seiner Weltanschauung allein gelassen häufig nicht mehr sein Leben meistern. Und er flieht in Süchte, Vergnügen und elektronische Traumwelten.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Without a god to rely upon who provides help at exactly the same rate as random chance, it's very easy to sink into addictions to alcohol and drugs and sex and video games and the internet. Definitely. And of course, Hindus and Muslims and Christians with their theistic worldview don't have problems coping and never fall into those same traps. That's a scientifically proven fact. If you live in the world that's up your own ass.
Was fordert der Atheismus? Was möchte er?
Babies! More babies! Atheismus is hungry!
Die Ablehnung der Existenz Gottes bedeutet für den Atheisten Freiheit.
You know, it said that on the brochure and I was so excited, but I turned atheist, and what do I find? There's this government and all these other people around me who are constantly judging me and telling me what to do. Me and the other new atheists are currently in the midst of a class action lawsuit against the people who put out that pamphlet. That's false advertising.
Er ist nicht länger von einem Schöpfer abhängig, der ihm das Leben gab.
Who, my mom? Well, yeah, I mean, I have my own job and my own place, so no, not really dependent. Wait, do you still live at home?
Er steht in keiner Verantwortung vor einem Richter, dessen Wille sein Leben bestimmt.
Could you please fly over here and tell that to that asshole who upheld my parking ticket the other day?
Für den Atheisten wurde mit der Abschaffung Gottes auch das ganze Lumpenbündel angsterfüllter Projektionen und abergläubischer Einbildung hinweggefegt, sodass die Welt endlich sauber ist.
Wouldn't someone who simply willed God not to exist still have those fear-driven projections and superstitious imaginings? After all, if they originally believed that God existed and then just willed him not to, they would still technically believe that he exists. They'd just be trying in vain to suppress that belief. But if they legitimately believe that the belief in God is projections and imaginings, then they didn't believe in God in the first place, and they don't believe in God now. So you have a little bit of a conflict in what you're saying an atheist actually believes. Does an atheist believe that a God exists and tries to suppress it and abolish it? Or does an atheist believe that God is a fear-driven projection and superstitious imagining?
Ihm ist dabei bewusst, dass damit diese Welt aber auch zur Hölle wird. Der Mensch zum Teufel und die Freiheit zum Fluch. Die Welt wird zur Hölle, weil das Leiden der Menschen, die hier leben, niemals enden wird.
I don't think the fact that statistically speaking, someone somewhere is probably always going to be suffering means that the world is hell. Because there's one difference between this world and the hell that's proposed by the Christians, and that is, in the hell proposed by the Christians, I don't get to stand here for a few minutes bitching into a microphone and then go have a cookie. See, in the current world, I'm not suffering at all. I find it quite pleasant most of the time. Whereas in this supposed hell, I would have the entire head of a pitchfork shoved in my asshole, and I'd be stuck watching nothing but train music videos for the rest of eternity. And while I'm sure that a number of people have lives that are actually that terrible, that does not make the world overall hellish. The majority of a person's life is usually not abject misery on that scale. That time your arm gets chopped off with a machete, it's terrible. Of course it's terrible. It hurts like a bitch for a long time and it's inconvenient not having your arm. But you get used to it and you move on if you live. In each life there are usually bad moments, and there are bad memories that are associated with those moments, and bad emotions that come along with it. But even so, people do get over things. And even in pretty bad situations, people can usually find something that makes them smile for a second. The world is not hellish just because not every single thing that happens in it is wonderful.
Der Mensch wird zum Teufel, weil alles Böse, alles Schreckliche, das er anrichtet, aus seinem eigenen Herzen kommt. Er ist kein vom Bösen Verführter, er ist das Böse in Person.
Evil is a concept created by humans to describe human actions that we consider counter to the interests of the group. Yes, evil comes from within a person, but good is also a concept defined by humans, which is used to describe actions that are in the interest of the group. See, you're trying to play this game of saying that evil is something that comes from within people, but good isn't. You're trying to say that because evil is something that we do, that we are evil personified, completely ignoring the much greater and more common good parts of us. People are generally good because good is synonymous with acting in the interests of society. And the fact that society still stands and grows and flourishes tells you, clearly, that good has evil outnumbered and outgunned completely. This thing you're trying to do of convincing people that the only way to have any good within themselves is to believe in God, and if they don't, they're purely, completely evil, is disheartening to say the least. Siegfried.
Und die Freiheit wird zum Fluch, weil jeder das tut, was er will, was er für gut und richtig hält oder ihm nützt. Niemand kann dem Menschen irgendwelche Vorschriften machen oder zu moralischen Werten verpflichten.
I think I might understand what the problem is here. Most of us understand the reasons why things are good or bad, the reasons why we should or should not do them, why the negative or the positive things that we do both affect us in return. Most of us also have a built-in, basic, primal, moral compass of sorts. The thing that tells us not to murder and that type of thing. And we are raised in a culture where other people have realized those things too. Humans have been living together in close quarters for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. We've learned what needs to happen for a society to function, remain healthy, and our kids are raised with that same knowledge. But apparently you, Siegfried, don't have that. Apparently, the only reason that you are concerned about how your actions affect other people and society in general is that if you do what Sky Daddy tells you is bad, he'll give you a spanking. If you honestly believe that as soon as your Sky Daddy turns his back, you're gonna go start raping and murdering, you're a sociopath. That is the only reason that you would actually do that if you ever became an atheist. Fortunately, most atheists aren't sociopaths. And I certainly hope that you never become an atheist, because if you sincerely believe that only your belief in God keeps you from destroying society for your sick and twisted version of your own good, which actually wouldn't do any good for you at all, then that is disturbing and a little frightening.
Eine solche Freiheit aber führt letztlich zur Herrschaft der Starken, zur Diktatur und damit wieder zum Ende der Freiheit.
Okay, so I could ask you where you're getting that ridiculous information. But what I'd rather do is point out, isn't an almighty God demanding that you spend your entire eternity worshipping it an extremely good example of the rule of the strong? I mean, that's about as rule of the strong as it gets.
Das alles ist dem Atheisten bewusst. Doch dieses negative Weltbild ist ihm lieber, weil er damit die Möglichkeit besitzt, diese Welt mit eigenen Kräften, nach eigenen Vorstellungen umzugestalten und vielleicht doch paradiesähnliche Zustände zu schaffen.
What you've just essentially said is that the atheist believes that in a godless world he can make the world a better place by implementing his own ideas with his own abilities. You imply that only in this worldview does a person have the power to do this. So are you saying that Christians do not believe that they have the ability to transform the world through implementation of ideas through their own abilities? They don't have the power to make the world a better place? As you say, paradise-like conditions, so they don't have the power to make the world more like their supposed paradise? So what do they do all day? Just sit around crying, "Woe is me! The world is such an awful place and I have no ability to change it." Luckily, I'll get eternity in heaven, but I just don't see a way to make this world any better, so I guess I'll just let it rot. That is an incredibly bleak and miserable outlook.
Für ihn bleibt das Problem, dass er diese bessere Welt, sollte sie denn jemals kommen, dass er diese bessere Welt nicht persönlich erleben wird. So hängt er genau wie der Christ einem Traum nach, mit einem Unterschied. Sollte der christliche Glaube stimmen, wird der Gläubige in dieser besseren Welt für immer leben. Der Atheist aber erlebt seine bessere Welt nicht. Und wenn doch, dann nur für ein paar wenige kurze Jahre.
That's right. The atheist who works to try to better the world knows that he will not necessarily see the better world. The improvements that he wants to see could come in 20 or 50 or 100 or 1,000 years. And you see, that's the difference between the dream of the atheist who tries to change things and what you claim to be the dream of the Christian. Speaking for myself, any attempts that I make to improve the world are not made for my sake. They're either made in an attempt to improve society for everyone, or they're made so that in thousands of years the human species will still be alive and flourishing. And so for my part, the dream that I hang on to is not exactly like the dream of the Christian, because as you say, the dream of the Christian is a better world for himself, a better world in the afterlife, one that he gets to experience forever. The form of the Christian dream that you propose is selfish, primitive, and destructive, and does not even pretend to be for the good of anyone but the individual.
Deshalb versuchen die meisten Atheisten, sich schon heute durch Konsum und Lebensgenuss wenigstens ein kleines Paradies zu bauen.
Are you calling the entirety of North America atheists? 'Cause that's pretty much all we do here, and I'm pretty sure there's a lot more Christians here than there.
Wenn dies jedoch scheitert, und wie oft geschieht das, dann führt es sie in schwere Lebenskrisen.
In a way, I think you might be right. I do think that excessive consumption and trying too hard to have fun all the time and not actually doing anything valuable or trying to improve your life can lead to serious life crises. But as I stated, North America is massively Christian, especially the United States, so I'm pretty sure that what you're proposing is an argument against excess and not an argument against atheism.
Freiheit ist auch ein zentrales Thema des christlichen Glaubens. Nur dass sie anders definiert wird. Der Christ geht von der Voraussetzung aus, dass es keine absolute Freiheit gibt, weil der Mensch zwischen zwei Mächten hin und her gerissen wird. Deshalb glaubt er, dass man wahre Freiheit nur im Glauben, im Gehorsam gegenüber Gott finden kann. Gibt er den Gehorsam auf, wird er der Diktatur und dem Zwang des Bösen verfallen.
You know, historically, it really seems that the dictatorship and compulsion of God hasn't seemed to work out that well for you. Why don't you go and try the dictatorship and compulsion of evil, what God calls evil, that is, and see if it's really that bad? I mean, it seems to me that nobody's really tried it, and a whole lot of atrocities have been committed in the name of God, but I haven't heard of very many committed directly in the name of Satan. I mean, if you must have a celestial government, it seems like you're cutting out half your options, just demonizing one because someone said it was bad one time. If you haven't tried it to see how it works, you really don't know yet, do you?
Die Geschichte belegt die Richtigkeit dieses Glaubens immer wieder, bis in unsere Tage.
Really? Just a few minutes ago, I skipped over a part where you said this. So when you have a list of atrocities committed in the name of God in your own video, do you really need me to say anything? I don't think so.
Zweitens will der Atheist Skepsis. Damit ist nicht die pubertäre Lust an der Kritik gemeint, die grundsätzlich gegen etwas ist, sondern die Art und Weise, durch zweifelndes Nachdenken und Fragen zu einem begründeten Urteil zu gelangen.
Reaching a reasoned conclusion by thinking and questioning. Now that sounds boring. I prefer the prepubescent joy in criticism. At least that's kind of fun.
Wir verdanken dieser Denk- und Arbeitsweise im Bereich Naturwissenschaft und Technik zahlreiche Neuerungen und Entdeckungen. Wird der Zweifel jedoch auf Dinge bezogen, die unsere Wirklichkeit, unsere Welt übersteigen, kann er zu keinen glaubhaften Ergebnissen führen.
Yep, you're right. The only way to get any believable results about things not of this world is to not investigate them at all.
Deshalb bleiben dem Atheisten in vielen Fragen seines Weltbildes Unsicherheit und Spekulation. Er muss also vieles von dem, was er vertritt, glauben. Nicht alles kann nämlich durch experimentelle Beweise abgesichert werden. Und wenn es nur die Theorie wäre, was am Anfang des Lebens tatsächlich geschehen ist, Schließlich war niemand von uns dabei.
Alright, let's try this. Let's throw out all theories and hypotheses about the origin of life, the origin of species, the origin of the universe, the origin of the world, all of it. We'll just throw it all out. Now we have nothing. We have no alternate explanations for anything, and we still have absolutely no reason to believe in God. Therefore, we still remain atheists, and what you're saying about atheists having to believe all this other stuff is proven false. Maybe once you actually start trying to prove why anyone should believe in your God, then we'll bother to pay attention.
Genauso wie die Vorwürfe der Gewalt und der Verletzung von Menschenrechten, die bekanntlich auch gerade von Atheisten begangen wurden.
Whoa, that was unexpected. In that part I skipped over, you were talking about atheists having to believe a bunch of stuff, which I had just covered previously to that and didn't need to do again. And then immediately, you jumped to, most atrocities were committed by atheists. Just out of nowhere. So now I suppose you're going to go into the list of all the supposed mass murderers and stuff who were atheists and you say were motivated by atheism? That has to be what you're going to do, right? I mean, you've already listed many atrocities committed in the name of God, so surely you're going to list at least some atrocities committed in the name of atheism if you're going to accuse atheists of having committed the majority of the atrocities in history, right?
Natürlich müssen wir zugeben, dass der Atheismus gegen eine Karikatur des christlichen Glaubens kämpft, ist nicht seine Schuld allein.
Okay, I guess you're not gonna do that, but oddly, instead of jumping into a list of how the atheists are bad, you're going back to how the Christians have made themselves look bad. So I guess I can't complain that loudly.
An dem falschen Bild des Christentums haben viele gläubige Menschen mitgezeichnet und nicht nur einige wenige kirchliche Würdenträger und Lehrer. Im Kampf gegen den Glauben wird vielen Atheisten jedoch nicht bewusst, dass ihre Weltanschauung selbst zu einer Religion geworden ist, deren Grundannahmen man glauben muss und nicht beweisen kann, wie wir es schon gesehen haben. Und nicht selten fangen sie an, selbst zu predigen und zu überreden, statt zu überzeugen.
I'm not completely sure what persuade rather than convince means. I think it must be an issue with translating concepts between languages. But I suppose what it probably means is something like, instead of using reasoned arguments to convince people of things, we're just saying, come on, guys, come on, atheism's really good, you guys. And I'm sure there are people who do that, so I'll leave that alone. But as far as atheism being a religion, it's quite clearly not. To be an atheist, there is no assumption that you have to believe. You don't have to believe that there is no God. You don't have to believe that the universe or life or species originated without the intervention of a higher power or even a god. You don't have to believe that there is no afterlife or no soul. There are no myths, no legends, no concepts at all that you have to believe. And none that you have to actively believe are false either. There are no religious rituals or laws that you must follow. There are no religious rituals or laws that you cannot follow, except of course the ones that require you to believe in a god, which by definition would make you a theist if you followed them. Therefore, it has no characteristics of a religion. You said it yourself with the naive atheists. Naive atheists are people who just have no concept of God. If atheism is a religion, how can you have people who are atheists simply out of not having a concept of a god, with no religious structure around it whatsoever? Religion is defined by things you believe, not by things that you don't.
Feuerbach dagegen behauptet, ein wahrer Atheist halte von den Prinzipien Liebe, Weisheit und Gerechtigkeit nichts, weil sie Kennzeichen Gottes seien.
Well, I don't know who Feuerbach is, but he sure doesn't sound like someone worth listening to. What is it with Christianity always trying to steal morality and claim that it only belongs to itself? It never fails to amaze me how after a Christian says something like you can only be good if you believe in God, that they actually become confused when they get some pushback.
Das Christentum ist nun vom Atheismus stark beeinflusst worden. Der Lückenbüßergott wurde begraben. Freiheit wurde wieder zu einem christlichen Grundsatz, so wie es uns das Neue Testament zeigt. Doch dabei sind einige auch weit übers Ziel hinausgeschossen und haben unter Freiheit auch Unabhängigkeit vom Willen Gottes verstanden. So legten die Kirchen vor 100 Jahren noch großen Wert auf den Gehorsam gegenüber den 10 Geboten, während manche Christen heute erklären, Jesus hätte sie abgeschafft und aufgehoben.
I know that Jesus was supposed to have abolished things like ritual sacrifice and so on, and some Christians assert, even though Jesus says in the Bible that he came not to change a jot or tittle of the old law, That he repealed stuff in the Old Testament, like killing gays, stoning people for working on the Sabbath, eating shrimp, and wearing mixed fabrics, and cutting your hair, and whatever other stupid crap was in there. But these lists of the things that Jesus supposedly repealed have, in my experience, always been extremely selective, and I've never heard anyone say that Jesus repealed the Ten Commandments. As a matter of fact, the Ten Commandments are often held up as the pillars of society. Is Jesus repealing the Ten Commandments actually a thing in Europe?
Der methodische Zweifel half, die Bibel nicht mehr so oberflächlich zu lesen.
In one of the parts I skipped over because it was boring, you talked about how René Descartes was the originator of this type of methodical doubt. Now his work was done in the 17th century. That's 1600 and some odd years of Christian theology being developed by reading the Bible in a way that you are claiming is superficial and absent of methodical doubt. So doesn't that kind of undermine Christian theology if the Bible was read superficially previous to René Descartes and Christian theology is based pretty much entirely upon that reading?
Man begann sich vermehrt mit der historischen und kulturellen Situation der biblischen Zeiten zu beschäftigen, sodass wir heute viele Aussagen besser verstehen können. Gerade die Archäologie hat viel dazu beigetragen.
I think I understand what you're trying to say now. You're trying to say that learning about the historical and cultural context has allowed people to say, "Oh, that doesn't matter, that was just the historical situation. The culture's different now, so that part of the Bible doesn't apply to me."
Die moderne Theologie hervor. Sie führte dazu, dass heute zahlreiche Aussagen der Bibel nicht mehr geglaubt und als Märchen und Legenden abgetan werden.
That doesn't sound like a bad thing. If you exercise methodical doubt when reading the Bible, which as you say helps to read it less superficially, and what you discover is that it consists primarily of fables, myths, and legends, then the correct course of action seems to be to wave aside those portions as fables, myths, and legends. Of course, if basic skepticism leads you to believe that probably most of the Bible consists of fables, myths, and legends, I really don't get why you would continue to put any stock in it whatsoever, but I guess you gotta start somewhere. Anyway, that's it, cause the last part of this video is also boring. Auf Wiedersehen, Siegfried.